The 8th of March 2026 represents the UK COVID Day of Reflection, where we look at lives that have been lost and reflect on what it means. And this is one of those times where I think about the many people who either say COVID wasn't a pandemic or was just another flu. I can guarantee you that I have never had any colleagues ever die in all my career in relation to an influenza mm, epidemic or whatever. Just never seen it before. COVID was unusual. And one of the important things, I saw a post on LinkedIn, and it made me reflect on what it felt like at the time. I haven't forgotten that. And you have here one of some of the people who died in the UK. And these were some of the doctors who died of COVID 19. And specifically, when I remember it, this was a colleague, and at the time when he passed away, it really traumatized those who knew him, not just because of the loss, but the fear that came with it. It was scary times because we didn't know what was going on. And when you see colleagues dying and you have to go and deal with patients who had the virus, it was scary. I remember the nightmares of waking up, struggling to breathe, and worrying if I had COVID. It was horrific. For me personally, the difference came when I was doing the research and saw the patterns that made sense. And I emphasize that when we reflect on the lives that have been lost, probably the most important responsibility would have been to get answers. Can you imagine lives lost and there are no answers? Why them? Why did it appear? And at that point, one of the reasons the LinkedIn post caught my attention was that predominantly early in the pandemic, it was people of certain racial backgrounds and certain ages that were doctors who were dying. This was initially discounted more to do with the fact that they were in more exposed environments. And that was true, maybe an accident and emergency, acute medicine, and so on. And that certainly had a part to play. Was it just as simple as that? Was there more that should have been done? And so when you look at the fact that, as I said, Day of Reflection, 8th of March, services are being held by members of the public, concerts, looking at remembering those lives. But how much more honor would it be to the tireless work and act of kindness shown by many if you can explain the signs, if you can understand why them? What was it about that cohort that made them at such high risk? If it happened again, would we have better strategies for them? What would we do? And so it's important. And again, as you look at it, and this is the hard look, you have to reflect on it. Without a shadow of a doubt, the majority of people or doctors here were male. There's one female here, and they were predominantly from ethnic backgrounds, for which only 21% of the UK doctors are from ethnic backgrounds. So we're talking about almost over 63% who died were from ethnic backgrounds. What was the mechanism? Now, as I said, it has been put across that this was just because of their exposure. But I think that that is too simple. That is not the full reason as to why they were at higher risk. And we almost owe them the honesty and the responsibility of trying to understand that science. And it probably plays out. I recently did the presentation on embalmer's clots. If you haven't followed it up, this was quite a detailed one. I've made the full thing where I was speaking with Bruce Raffley and Dr. Matt Shelton. It's available on the Substack. The link is in the description below if you want to see it. But we were looking at a very specific pattern with regards to glucose phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency. And the fact that this is something that is present in a significant proportion of the population as well, and it could be relevant in terms of the way how disease manifested itself. But the main thing that made me understand this pattern was the insight in April of 2020 that there seemed to be a strong link between the pattern of severe disease and the people who had free floating ACE2 in their bloodstream. And that is where the autoimmune concept came from. And as you look at this image again and think about it, predominantly male, predominantly from Black and Asian backgrounds, the two women, sorry. Look at this and then correlate it to what I had seen at the time that I thought was very relevant in terms of the science. So all we had said in April of 2020 was, could the people at highest risk have the highest concentration of free floating ACE2? And before I show you this slide, I'm going to explain it a little bit better so that you understand essentially all we were saying in terms of the science. And it was quite a simple graphic that I used, is that normally in the blood vessels, ACE2 is predominantly attached to the lining, the endothelial cells. Now, what happens is as people get older and they have certain conditions, a special ACE2 snipping enzyme, ADAM17, frees some of this ACE2 to be floating in the bloodstream. Now, the mechanism as to why it happens, we don't fully understand, but we know that it seems to be a compensatory mechanism that the body is using. Now, when the virus then hits the bloodstream, our question is very simple. Does the free-floating ACE2 that binds to the spike protein also bind to the viral spike protein in the bloodstream? And if that is the case, what happens when the immune system gets it? And that was essentially all that we had said in terms of the pathophysiology in understanding. And then what it would have meant is that if you then had multiple proteins attached to, say, the spike protein, in this case, this would represent ACE2, this would represent, say, furin, neuropilin, DC sign. This is what it would look like to the immune system. And so the immune system would not necessarily be able to differentiate ACE2 from the spike protein. And it would just crunch up everything together and then form antibody targets to multiple parts, including these proteins. And this was what we had said in 2020. And at the time, it seemed strange that it was autoimmune, but we were seeing clear benefits with regards to steroids. So suddenly autoimmunity makes a lot of sense. And so when you have that situation occurring, you then end up with clotting in the bloodstream. The immune system kicks off, and you then have multiple virus activating clotting, and this then leads to the clotting that would happen in the lungs of people with severe disease. And this would block the blood vessels and then lead to respiratory compromise. And this was the essence of what we had said. And so the question is, what is the connection, therefore, with the cohort that we had said, ethnic minorities? Why would they be at higher risk? What is the connection in relation to ACE2 and free ACE2? So this is the slide that came from a very important study that was done not around the pandemic. It was being done over 10 years. It was coincidentally published in 2020. And when you look at the determinants of ACE2, free ACE2 in the bloodstream, you can then see why I was concentrating on the patterns that would occur. And let me just see if I can find this here. I'll show this here to you. This here represents the characteristics of elevated free floating serum ACE2, the sex, genetics, and weight. The most important determinant is male sex. The second then is their ancestry, East Asians, Africans. Third is their weight, obesity, then diabetes, then age, then blood pressure, then smoking. And so you can then see, based just on this, this seems to marry quite easily with the characteristics of many of the people who ended up with severe disease. Male, certain ethnic background, obesity, diabetes, older age group, hypertension. And if we fully understood this, we would have been so much better able to protect them. And this is what I mean in terms of that responsibility. Without that piece of understanding of science, we then struggle to be able to help those going forward in the future. My concern at the time is if you understood this principle about autoimmunity and the risk, it would have meant that the scientific community would have been very cautious with using spike protein to imprint or to trigger the immune system for future exposure. And my argument, based on the understanding of that science at the time, was that certainly if people were in high risk categories, fitting older age groups, if they had certain characteristics for which we knew they had much higher risk, looking at the Oxford Q score, you vaccinate those people who had not yet been exposed. What didn't make sense to me at the time was, why would you have targeted the healthcare cohorts who were already surviving and had faced the virus and had natural immunity? Those people who were at risk early on in the pandemic got sick and potentially died, but once they recovered, as far as I knew, in terms of viral infections, it seems that they put COVID into a unique category where your natural immunity was not enough. And based on the data that we had from SARS-CoV, that didn't make sense. So when it came to looking forward, the reality of what was done was not based on a good understanding of the science. And this is, as I said, where we would be best able to honor those people who died, those people who sacrificed. Their best way of being honored is to understand the science, to say, if we knew this at this point, we could have saved these lives. Because the principle about autoimmunity is very simple. If you use the correct dose of immune suppression, this is the Dr. Shetty protocol, steroids, he used antihistamines as well. Day 8, as soon as they started to deteriorate, he saved all of his patients. And if we had more like Dr. Shetty across the world who were able to practice the medicine where they understood and found ways to bypass the cytokine dysregulation leading to the cytokine storm, we would have saved many more lives. And that, I think, is probably our biggest failure from a scientific point of view. Not enough attention has been put on understanding what was the exact pathophysiology leading to severe disease. Why those people? Why not everybody? Why? And that's the reason why I'd done at my full advanced COVID course, which was over about 8 modules, over 8 hours, capturing all of that research and that thinking so that it can be used in the future to help us to have a better understanding of disease. We still have a lot of work to do because there's so many people who are still sick, so many people who are still struggling. And if you understand that autoimmune principle, you would realize why, with ongoing circulation of the virus and the triggering immune responses, especially in the intestine, we are seeing this massive spread of people being unwell, unusual patterns of disease, and this is going to continue until the science is fully understood. There's no shortcut around this, and all we can do is continue to push things forward. So, if you want to understand a little bit more about what I said with embalmer's clots, we really took a deep dive on the science. The link is in the description. If you are struggling, especially with gut related issues, we're building a full system to help people get through that. So you can do the link and go through a simple questionnaire, and you'll get some emails and links. And if you follow through, there is a good chance that we can find solutions. But it takes time, and we need more people working to try and see if we can find the best solutions for everyone. Thank you very much. And as we remember all those lives that were lost early in the pandemic, let's not forget them. They served everyone in that time, and they sacrificed for many patients. And we should always remember them, no matter what has happened subsequently. Their lives are still important, and we should always try and take some time to focus on it. Thank you very much, and have a good evening.